In this video, I'm going to show the process of building these, but first I'm going to explain what they are. I attend a convention every year called VCFMW, which stands for Vintage Computer Festival Midwest. And one of the things I do there is run a telephone network using Meridian PBX, and running all the cabling and delivering telephone service and other services to people's tables for them to use in their exhibits. The intention of these devices is that they have 8-pin modular jack connectors everywhere, and they can act as sort of a cable tap. This port is an input, this one is a through, and these are the outputs. And by using shorting jumper shunts, I can configure the polarity and the pair assignment of each of the output jacks and distribute telephone services that way. So one of these will basically go at every table that orders telephone services. It'll be configured properly for the lines that table needs, and then the end user will plug in their telephone devices, modems, phones, other devices to the output ports to get their service. I ordered a whole bunch of parts and boards, and I'm going to start building some today, kind of get an idea of what the process will entail and how long it's going to take me. In an attempt to reduce the amount of time it takes me to solder these together, given they're entirely through-hole components, I purchased a solder pot, which is basically an electric-powered crucible for melting solder. They're commonly used for tinning wires, desoldering components from boards, and they can also be used to kind of crudely solder through-hole components. We'll go into more detail about that process when I get to that step. So now I've gotten myself all set up here. I've got parts stored away in this organizer so that I know where they're at, and they're all easily accessible in a smaller quantity than the several hundred parts that I ordered for these boards. I've also built myself some fixtures. I just used PCBs to hold some screws in place with some spacers, and that gives me a way to set the board on something so that I don't have to touch it with my hands, because this next part will be applying flux. So basically I need to apply some flux to every place that something gets soldered. I don't need to apply it to the whole board, but it does have to get on every point that needs to get soldered. The flux will help keep the solder, once it goes and floats on the solder pot, sticking and wetting the joints well. So basically every through hole on here I need to brush with some flux. And the next step after that will be to flip the board over and place all the parts. Once you have all the components placed and your solder pot is hot, you need to clear the dross from the top, because that'll prevent good soldering. Just skim it off to the side. I have the solder pot set to about 700 degrees. And you take your board with components and flux, carefully float it on top, usually wiggle it around for about 7 to 8, maybe 9 seconds. Kind of peel it off so that the solder pulls away from the surface. And then you need to set it on a heat-proof surface. This board here I think is one that turned out pretty good. I'm going to refocus the camera. You can see that, yeah, there's some solder bridging that'll have to be cleared, but for the most part all the joints soldered all at once. Pretty good results on that one. Some of the other ones I had a little trouble. I had to dial in the heat again. I couldn't remember how hot I had the pot last time I did this. Depending on how well your soldering went, you may have some extra solder to scrape from the bottom of the board, mostly around the edges. You get the temperature right and you use flux like you should, you generally won't have this problem. You also need to make sure you keep the solder pot clean. But if you're too cold or you don't get the oxides off the top of the solder pot, then you may end up with some excess stuck to the board that you need to clear off. The next step is to do any rework that's necessary, clearing solder bridges, soldering any joints that were missed, cleaning up any other issues on the board. Next step then is to wash the boards. So I've got isopropyl alcohol here, and give them some time to soak. You can put a cover on the container to keep the alcohol from evaporating. And in the meantime, I'm going to heat up a drying oven, because after the alcohol soak and scrubbing, they're going to get rinsed with just regular water and then they need to be dried. Bring it over to the sink. Rinse everything off. Try to get as much water off as possible. Or I put it in the oven to dry.